The Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
Welcome back to the Bliss Business Podcast, where we explore how empathy, connection, and purpose transform business and leadership. I'm Tullio, joined today by Mike. In a world full of noise, connection is a strategic edge. That edge often comes down to one simple but overlooked capability: visibility. When someone is seen, their voice matters. When people matter, communities form. Let's introduce our guest today, Mike.
Tullio, I am so excited for our guest today. We've got none other than Brooke Clark. You might know her as the founder and CEO of Seat 1A Advisors. Yep. Thank you, Brooke, for being with us today. Now, she has spent 2 decades working behind the scenes as a talent strategist and a leadership advisor, and particularly in Utah's life sciences ecosystem. Now, her firm, Seat 1A, which you may find that name interesting. Maybe we'll learn a little bit more about that later in the show. Helps leaders treat visibility as a career asset. Now, guiding them really to their own impact, expanding their reach, and opening doors to opportunity. Even before founding Seat 1A, Brooke held senior roles, helping scale organizations and develop leaders, often, like we said, behind the scenes. But today, she's front and center as our guest. Today, she works directly with executives and rising leaders to craft story, strategy, and outreach so that really they're not just flying under the radar any longer. Brooke, we are so excited to have you on our show today. Welcome to our show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Tullio's on mute, so maybe I'll just ask the first question.
Let's fix that.
You're not going to be a very good host if you're on mute, Tullio.
Okay, thanks for that wonderful introduction, Mike. Now, I was saying, let's kick this off. Brooke, I love how you say visibility is a career asset. Why is visibility so deeply tied to connection and community in business? And maybe you can give us a little bit background on how you got here in your journey as well. But why is that so important, the visibility in terms of connection and community in business?
Yeah, thank you. I feel very strongly about this because I think that visibility is an opportunity for people to share what they've spent their careers learning, and they're able to share insight that maybe they wish they would have had as somebody who is coming up in business. And so visibility, I don't see as self-promotion, by the way. I see it as looking within and saying, what are those valuable insights that if I could encapsulate my career into this, what can I share? And how can I leave that as a legacy within my field and profession? So it's really a teaching and learning experience rather than look at me, self-promotion.
Right.
Yeah.
Which someone could take, it to mean that, but that makes so much sense, right? Because without being visible, who are you going to connect to, right? And how's your community going to be able to reflect and see you? So I'm curious to learn a little bit more about your journey. And then in this journey, Brooke, that you've had, was there a moment when you realized that helping leaders build that kind of visibility was really important, almost, I guess, more important than, traditional leadership?
Yeah, and I'm really proud of the career journey I've had so far. It's been a great experience. I actually got my start in PR, so I have a journalism degree with an emphasis on PR, and that's sort of what I pull from that when I think about visibility. When I think about being able to uncover a story behind the story within someone's own career journey, and being able to help them figure out what value add that could be to people that would want to hear their message. So that sort sort of journalism bug and PR bug got me early, and I still pull from that. I then spent 10 years as an agency recruiter for a boutique recruiting firm, and I worked with a lot of people who had excellent careers and backgrounds, and who I would proactively get in front of my clients, but who I needed to work with them to be able to tell their story in order for them to really shine in front of the clients that I was getting them in front of. And then after that, I worked in biotech and led a recruitment effort. I started at this very small biotech in Salt Lake City called Recursion, and I think I was employee 40 or something like that. And we grew the recruiting function, grew the company to over 600 at the time that I was there, went public, became a clinical stage company. And it was so incredible to see the work that went in, the work that went into our impact on patients. But it was also equally interesting to see people rise through their careers during my time there.
Very, very, interesting. And I could see, how some leaders may take, the visibility component to be a little bit chest pounding, right? Or in certain cultures, right, having too much visibility or being out in the front may not necessarily be looked down upon, but maybe a characteristic that isn't emphasized. So I'm really curious, like, what would you say to someone who's perhaps naturally humble, more behind the scenes, and then feels that resistance to becoming more visible? Like, how have you helped them? What have you said?
This is a really timely question, because a while back I was putting together a panel of experts and executives, and the number one referred person that I wanted as a panelist, and all roads led back to this person when I was looking for referrals. The person I talked to, incredibly accomplished, incredible reputation. When I reached out to see if they would be on the panel, they sort of sunk back and said, I'm kind of a shrinking violet. I'm kind of a person that wants to be in the background. I don't know if people want to hear from me. This feels very ego driven if I do this, or this feels very chest pounding, right?
Yep.
And the way that we had to think about this, and the way that I brought them along and recruited them to be on the panel, was, let's reframe this into what in your career, what are some aspects of your career, or what are some insights that you can share with the audience, right? Everybody has something interesting to talk about. And in my 15-minute hard pitch with this individual, by the time I was done with the call, they decided that they did want to be on the panel. And I wrapped up by saying, not only do I think you should be on this panel, but I would pay money to hear you speak. I think you should. I don't know what your audience is, and I don't know what feels true to you, but what I can tell you is you have a really interesting story to tell. It's just a matter of how you want to tell it and to what audience.
Yeah. Being able to really craft it, I would say, right, in a way that doesn't necessarily have to be viewed as, sort of like we said earlier, chest pounding, but really, I think if a leader is able to be authentic, if they're able to be vulnerable, it really comes to creating that connection, right? And people want to almost get behind you and champion what that leader is all about. Oh, Tullio, you might be on mute again.
Goodness, what's going on?
Foiled by the mute button. It's just one of those days, Tullio.
When I started doing these shows, it was the show called Dojo Live, and my co-host Carlos always used to be on mute. It became his signature thing. He would start talking. It was like something became a thing, like where he would do it on purpose. It just reminds you of that. Those were good times. We were all learning how to do this thing, but just hearing you, it reminded me of, we have Bruce Cleveland on the show. He was one of the early CMOs at Siebel, and his whole shtick is that the CEO should be the market engineer of the company and should be the voice of the company, especially in B2B, and humanizing the company with that voice is what ultimately gets people to want to buy, being an authority in the marketplace. So if you have a belief that that's kind of ego driven, or, you're pounding your chest, that wouldn't serve you as a market engineer, to go do that. So it's challenging though, because I look back and I spent the first 20 years of my career wanting to kind of hide out And it wasn't until what you just mentioned about like identifying what value you have to offer, and I had some good coaches, that I was like, oh, maybe now I have an obligation to do it instead of it. Then it becomes less. Then ego becomes like, I have something to offer that I should offer, that I should go do. And it becomes more of a mission. But it was still hard to make that transition. And it's still hard sometimes today. So I just wanted to acknowledge what you're saying. I've seen that. And I've seen the other side of it, how it's strategic to helping your company too. Talking about yourself is strategic to helping your company too. So,
yeah.
It is.
Yeah, I'd say too, it almost, in some ways leads to longevity, not just for that leader, but for the organization. A couple of shows back, we had Gavin McMahon on, and he was really talking about the importance of storytelling, right? Because it could be a humorous story or it could be a very personal story, but we just know leaders that when they tell those stories, it does create an awful lot of connection with the organization. I think even more so, to your points, Brooke, and to Tullio's points, when it comes to visibility, it's so important now because we don't see each other in the office, right? There used to be, and I know growing up in my career, you would see the leaders of the organization come in, or they would, speak at a meeting, and it would move you, right? It would create a movement. And so now, ever more important to be able to have that kind of visibility in a hybrid world. And in fact, so one of the sections of our show that we like to talk about are kind of systems that we could create, particularly now, right? The post-COVID era, that's much more hybrid. I'm sure you've come across some things that may really work. So, might be good to kind of delve into some of those systems, Tullio.
Let's jump right into that. So, and it's very valid because a lot of leaders, as we've mentioned, they struggle to maintain that presence while also doing the work. That's the other side of it too. Once you get past the sort of, is this me pounding my chest? Is it an ego thing? Then there's also the reality is I've got work to do. I got a business to run. How much time can I devote to go build presence? So what systems or practices do you advise leaders that they can embed so that they remain grounded and also connected and visibly themselves? How do you balance that out?
I love this. And systems thinking is my love language. Systems thinking and storytelling are my love languages. So I think that building this into a system, this can be very overwhelming for people. If we say, hey, probably need to be a little bit more visible. You've been heads down doing a bunch of work, and now you're looking up and saying, I'm not anywhere. I have something to talk about, and I'm not on LinkedIn, or I'm not speaking at a conference, or I'm not on a panel or on a podcast. How do I approach this? And when my clients come to me, it can be quite overwhelming. And so I think that it can be really important to break this down into sort of bite-sized segments where you first and foremost have to look at what matters to you. What is your message? First of all, what stories do you have to tell? What insights do you have to tell? And then you have to look at who is your audience and what are you trying to solve for? So are you trying to speak to the broadest audience possible, or are you trying to, is your audience a very, small group of people? How do you get in front of them? What are the rooms that you need to get into in order to be in front of them and to share your voice with them? And then from there, it can be really helpful to figure out what is important to you and what is not. And I have a sort of a decision-making career dashboard that I worked on with one of your guests, Lynn Christian, was on in May. Lynn, I've been working with Lynn for 10 years, Lynn at Soul Salt, been working with Lynn for 10 years and created a dashboard of what is important to me and what are those messages, that I want to tell. And I look at that and I say, okay, if you know what your story is, you know what your audience is, and you have a decision-making framework around where you want your voice to be heard, then it's a matter of figuring out a cadence that works for you. You don't have to be posting on LinkedIn every day. You don't have to be speaking every month, but building a cadence that is strategic and sustainable is more effective than trying to solve the whole world in one day, right? And trying to figure it all out and do all the things.
Yeah, for sure. And it's as you were speaking, you totally reminding me of some of the really great leaders that I've had kind of even in my career, right? And two in particular. So Bill O'Neill, who is the starter of Investors Business Daily, passed away about a year and a half ago. But his legend just so lives on because of how he would tell the story, right? We all got to know the story about how Bill, the origin story of how Bill started Investors Business Daily, but also his purpose, right? He was serving institutional investors, and then on a flight, which actually maybe at this point we want to talk about Seat 1A, but on a flight home, was talking to the person sitting next to him who was just all confused with looking at stock tables in the Wall Street Journal, and he said, "I have got the information and the data to help all these individual investors. I'm going to create a tool for them." And that was the movement, right? That was the drive behind IBD. And we would tell that story or hear that story as employees of IBD, and it motivated you every single day for what you were there to do. So very much. And the other thing I would add to your comment, Brooke, about the rooms, like what rooms do I need to be in? In our agency work, we use different channels. And so you mentioned LinkedIn. Other channels can be used as well on X or Twitter as well. Many leaders use Instagram very well to be able to tell a little bit more of a personal story, less professional, right? And so it really starts to create visibility of that leader in a lot of different facets of their life. And I think we as observers bond with them in a much different way. I don't know if you've got any additional thoughts on that or if you'd agree.
Yeah, I agree. I think, again, it just depends on who your audience is, how you want to reach them, how do they receive their information and news, right? Yeah. If you are very customer centric or audience centric, how do you tell your story in a way that lands with them and then, gives them something to think about and maybe something to change up in their day?
Yeah, for sure.
I think you said something really key there in that, if I could just interject real
quick.
quick.
Go for it.
What I heard you say is if you shift into a mindset that you're being of service, then all those things about pounding your chest, is this an ego thing, just go away, because it's really just an opportunity to be of service. Is that kind of the way to think about this for those who might be struggling with it?
That's how I think about it. When my clients come to me, this is the conversation I have with them in the very first conversation, right? It is, I don't want this to seem like I'm self-promoting. And I don't know if it's that my clients have a humility, if there's like a through line of humility that exists within the clients that I work with, but oftentimes it is that, right? I don't want to be pounding my chest. I don't want this to come off as self-promotional. And so we go through what's important to you. What is important to you? What is the message that you want to get out to the world? And I have a lot of clients where this is probably the final third of their career, and they see this as a legacy play. They see this as, how can I help those who coming up behind me in this field, make even better progress? Or how can I help them overcome something that took me years to overcome? And sometimes it's just a matter of seeing a post or hearing something at a conference or on a panel or reading an op-ed that sparks something within someone, and they're able to have they're able to put it into action that day even.
Yeah. And I'm actually curious about the results too, Brooke, in terms of measurement, right? Because these leaders, they'll probably want to see some sort of results or be able to track that. So how do you measure whether your visibility efforts are resonating and building that real connection? How have you, I guess, shown that to leaders, or what have you done for them to show that to them?
Yeah. And I think that as we know, in the field that we're in, it's, some of it is qualitative and some of it is quantitative. And we want to be able to tell a story with data. And it's different for every client, right? I have one client in particular that it is about engagement numbers. This person wants the broadest audience possible. They want to have a very broad reach. And so to this individual, it's about how much engagement is happening with my posts. It is about the audience that she's able to reach out to and be in front of, and converting that into follows and things like that. So that person, to them, it's a broad numbers game. To another one of my clients, she just wants to be in front of a very specific group of private equity and VC audience. And it is a matter of, okay, I was invited to this conference, or I was invited to this meeting, or, I had someone reach out to me on a social media platform and ask me a question about business valuation, which is, her level of area of expertise. And so it's different for everybody. And I think that that's what I ask my clients when I first meet with them is, how do we know it's successful? Right? Because the metrics will be different for each client. And so what does success look like for you? Let's build that out as far as, qualitative and quantitative, and then figure out where do we need to shift our strategy based on the data. Right.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think in relation, I'm glad you mentioned the point about the qualitative and the quantitative, because even in our industry and the work we do at the agency, somebody really can get so laser focused on vanity metrics that great, you're seeing those, but it's really not creating the connection or the movement that you want at the end of the day. And so I think patience with it is also key. Internally, like for example, one of former heads of marketing that I used to work for would say that you almost have to say the same thing ad nauseum, and then wait for others to start parroting back to you, and then now you're starting to really get the sense that, okay, this is just landed, and you might already be so sick with that particular message or that particular narrative that you want to change it, but it really requires an awful lot of patience rather than abandoning something too soon. So
I think that's brilliant, Mike. There's actually a science behind that. I mean, the whole point of brain rewiring, which is neuroscience, is the repetition of mantras, right? Which you're trying to recreate. You're trying to create new beliefs. So when you're repeating over and over every day at scale in the organization, it's almost as if they're repeating that mantra with you. And after about 3 months, behavior starts to change. So there's effectiveness of doing that. It's brilliant, actually. But most people get bored of doing it over and over, but you have to be consistent with it. That's the trick. You have to keep repeating it over and over and not get bored with it, because it works.
Yeah, absolutely. It takes not only a certain number of times for someone to hear it, but also over a certain period of time, continuing to hear the same thing. Brooke, earlier you mentioned the work that you've done around figuring out first what's important to somebody, right, and what change they're trying to make. We think about that topic in terms of purpose. We helping our clients. What is really their why and their purpose. So maybe kind of delving into that a little bit, and then maybe now you can share with us too the story behind Seat 1A and your purpose. So when you think about visibility and the impact, right, what's kind of the deeper purpose behind your work at Seat 1A, and then also as well, like how do you ensure that your own visibility is rooted in that purpose and that service, and not just say ego per se?
Yeah, I love that question, and I think that I had to think about this in terms of service, right? How can I work with my clients to help them see within themselves something that may not appear obvious, and putting a story around that. And so for me, it's been a through line throughout my career when I work with people to say, I can clearly see this about you. Do you see it in yourself? If so, let's figure out what are those 3-4 amazing things that you're solid at, and that you want to share and teach, and use this as a teaching and learning experience to the people that you're trying to teach. And then how do we help you tell that story, and how do we help you come up with proof points that support that. So I run with my clients, I run them through a career brand architecture process. It's a full due diligence process. And we come up with this and we look at what are those messaging pillars, what are those differentiating factors within those, and then what are those proof points so that you can believe in it yourself, right? What are those data? What's the data, the metrics, the quotes, the things that people say about you? And then to your earlier point, having that on repeat so that when someone's in a room speaking about what they do professionally, or when someone's in a speaking engagement and talking about something, they can quickly go back to that to say, God, I have a really great story around this. I can talk to this. And I think that the audience will really respond. So to pull that back to your question, I see this as an active service. This is my career passion. I have been doing this since I was an agency recruiter, right? I would take the time to sit down and say, okay, just did an interview with you. I'm going to present you to my client. But I think that there's more here. And your resume doesn't show it. Your LinkedIn profile doesn't show it. It didn't come out as much in this interview. But do you have 20 more minutes? Let's sit down and walk through this. And that is where I found a lot of energy. And I found that's one day I'm going to do this for a living. And that time has come.
Okay, so tell us about a little bit more then about Seat 1A and how you came up with the name and why it's so important to you.
Yeah, it's funny. I'll tell you a story. I grew up as an airline kid. Both of my parents worked for what was then Continental, purchased by United, but merged with United. But I was a Continental Airlines kid, and I started flying alone at the age of 5. Right, I fly from Salt Lake to Denver, every couple of months, as an unaccompanied minor, and I got really good at talking to the person in the seat next to me. I got really good at asking questions, and I got really good at sort of observing other people who were flying. And I remember as I would, as a small little girl, getting onto that airplane and looking, as I entered the plane, looking at that coveted seat 1A, and saying, one day that will be my seat, mostly because I just wanted to get off the plane quick. I really don't like turbulence, which is kind of ironic, but I just thought it was the best seat on the plane. And so that was something that I always, placed a lot of emphasis. And so when I work with my clients, I ask them, what is that seat that you want to put yourself into? It could be anything. It could be career advancement. It could be retiring and starting a nonprofit. It could be anything. But what is that seat? And then how can I be your partner in getting you there? Yeah.
So now I'm really curious. We all love stories. We've talked about story on this show. So give us perhaps a real story. You've helped many leaders rise. So is there a story of someone who deeply inspired perhaps you or that you've helped? Tell us a little bit about their story.
Yeah, I am very excited to talk about this specific example. And this was somebody that I worked with, probably about 6 years ago. And this individual, her name is Hannah Gordon, and she was a up and coming scientist at the biotech that we worked at. And she would ask me, Brooke, do you have some time to meet with me? Can you meet with me every month for 6 months and just help me find my voice and be able to tell some stories about what I think leadership ought to look like in a company. I know I've got a perspective on this. And so we met, and she's a great friend, and we met, and I found so much fulfillment in helping her be able to tell her story. And boy, does she have a great story. She was an up-and-coming scientist, and she was also a pilot. She's a small airplane pilot. How amazing. And and she now, we worked together to figure this out. And she did a lot of work on her own. And since then, she's now the chief product officer at a biotech unicorn called Enveda out of Boulder, led by another previous coworker. And I will look on LinkedIn and on social media, and I will see that she's speaking at a conference. I will see that she's, very visible, but in a way that's authentic to her. She's so fantastic and down to earth. And I see what she's saying, and I gain a lot of inspiration from that. So it's really a full circle moment.
Wow, you could just see the passion coming through as you were telling that story.
That's amazing. Now, Brooke, it does take and often requires courage. Visibility requires courage. Some people may not be worried about ego at all. They're just shy. They don't want to be seen. It takes some courage. So where does your courage come from when you choose to show up more boldly? And how do you help others tap into that?
Mm-hmm. It does take a lot of courage. And I don't know. I don't know where my courage comes from. I think that if I'm passionate about something, and I'm with, amazing people, I want to meet other people. I'm that 5-year-old on the plane who wants to talk to the person next to me. Right. So I was built being able to talk to people and with this sort of curiosity. People are just people. People have stories, people have problems, right? People are just people, and I want to talk to them, and I want to be a resource for them. But it does take courage, and it takes courage to show up. And that's what I tell this to my clients, but I mostly tell this to this next generation of workers is just show up to the thing. Just show up to the networking event. Just show up to the meetup. Meet one person. Don't think about it as networking. Thinking about it as like meeting a friend or learning something new that day. And so I think that there's a lot of pressure. And so in my family, we talk a lot about if something is high stakes or low stakes, right? And thinking about how much courage does it take if it's a high stakes moment versus a low stakes moment. The way that I see myself is I am that person in somebody's corner who, if they are getting ready to go onto a podcast, I'm helping them think through what do you want to share? Then how do you put your heart into it? Right? I'm here to help in the background as someone's navigator, essentially.
Yeah, I can see that first. Sorry, go ahead, Tullio.
That's so key, getting people out of their heads and into their heart. That's the most difficult thing, I would say, too, because I've struggled with that in the past, where it's not about how you show up intelligently, it's how you show up to enroll people into what you're saying. And that requires being authentically and heart-driven. And some people struggle with that. A lot of people struggle with that because that's a very vulnerable place to be. And that requires courage, too, to be vulnerable. But I could see how someone having you on their corner would be very encouraging. You have a lot of passion for this, which is wonderful.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. Yeah, and you said neuroscience a little bit earlier. It's getting people out of that fear part of their brain, right? The amygdala starts to react, and that all you can think about is how to protect yourself from the fear, and it starts putting the focus in the wrong area, right? We start to focus so much on ourselves versus on others or on the movement or the purpose. So I'm actually quite curious too. You shared the story about Hannah, there, Brooke, and having visibility can really have a profound effect. So I'm really, maybe if you could articulate for us, what is the ripple effect of visibility, say on the teams or on, individuals' families or other people's families, or even on communities? What would you say the ripple effect of that is? And is there any sort of like unexpected ways that sometimes it's shown up that perhaps you've seen in your experience?
I think that to me, it's about building community. I think that once someone has the courage to be able to share a story or an insight, it sparks something within someone to say, well, then what do I have to say that would be valuable? Or what I have a counterpoint to that. This person was bold and put out a statement that maybe I disagree with, but I'm going to engage in thoughtful debate. And I'm going to say, with all due respect, I have another alternative point of view I'd love to add to that. And that can create, if done well, it can create an amazing dialogue that then brings people together. And so someone being bold and saying, wow, I'm going to go out and I'm going to talk to a group of students about this, or I'm going to go out and speak to a group of business leaders about that. It starts a wave of thinking about what I, as the audience, can be sharing within my own community.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So how can I be part of that movement? For sure. So, voice could be so strong, for sure.
And one thing I'd like to add to that too, just from a practical standpoint, and this is something that I talk to my clients about, is, you don't have to post all the time. You don't have to be out speaking all the time. But if you want to leave these as moments in time, thought leadership, sharing your perspective on something, you're almost leaving like a breadcrumb trail for when you want to be discoverable, right? If somebody is looking to make an exit, and I work with people to help them navigate career transitions, if they have a trail of things that they're out talking about when they're being recruited, or they have an executive team or a board looking through and doing due diligence and looking through their posts, they will be able to see, wow, this person's out there and they have a perspective.
100%. And I would say too, don't be afraid to take your contrarian view. And also, it's not bad to, sort of take your, stand on a particular thing. And because then, like you said, right, the ripple effect is you're shedding some more visibility, or you're adding perspective that others may not be really thinking.
Be okay about with the punches, that might follow.
There are a lot of those these days.
You just got to be okay with that. And then part of it also requires some self-love to just not always have to be switched on. Like, it's okay not to always be switched on too.
And Tullio, I would love to add something to that my mentor, my dear friend and mentor, and she was my boss for years. Her name is Tina Marriott. And one thing that she taught me was believe in the power of experimenting. She encouraged me to go take an improv class. She felt sometimes that my communication was almost too buttoned up, and she wanted to see a little bit more fluidity in how I was communicating with the executive teams and the leadership within the company. So I went and took an improv class, right? And could think on my feet and experiment in a low stakes way. That meant everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking of the topic of love, we're at that time now. We're at the end of the show. We can continue for a long time here, but we're coming up at the end. And there's one question we ask. It's, what's the purpose of love in business? But I want to ask this a little differently today. In visibility work, there's always the temptation to self-promote or perform. It kind of comes in time. You see the metrics, you see results. It's addictive sometimes, and you can easily lose your way. How do love, humility, and service inform your approach to showing up, publicly?
Yeah. I think that at least for me, I have to believe in what I'm talking about. It has to be in service for someone. When I am out speaking or talking to someone or in a group, I think back to how can I share an insight that can impact this person and what they're trying to accomplish for the day or for the month or for the year. It is all in service of teaching and learning, and not just about, this is what I have to say, and I'm following my company's messaging. I'm trying to get out I'm trying to make this perfect and get every sort of messaging point out there. It's more that, yes, and how does this align with my own value system? And can I get behind this and can I be passionate about that?
I think this goes back to what we often talk about, Mike, as well, as this idea of having purpose. It's not just for companies. Like, have a personal purpose, because in those moments where you can get lost, and it happens because it's tempting, you got to go back to, why am I doing this? What's the purpose behind this?
What 100%, right? And I think it goes for organizations. Because employees will align their personal values and purpose to that brand, and as well, we see that consumers do the same thing, right? So we really need to, like you said, Tullio, champion that purpose and know that it's not just the typical stakeholders that may be connecting to it.
Yeah.
Wow, so 40 minutes just isn't really enough, Brooke, for this topic. It really isn't. We could have a whole nother show. But for our listeners, Brooke, that want to connect a little bit more with you, or perhaps learn a little bit more about Seat 1A Advisors, where would you like them to go, or how would you like them to connect with you?
Yeah, they can find me at seat1aready.com is information about Seat 1A. They can find me on LinkedIn, and it's Brooke C801 on LinkedIn. You can find me there. And I publish a biweekly newsletter where I share different insights and articles that have real tangible takeaways.
Look forward.
Well, thank you, Brooke. Thank you for shining light on the power of presence and connection through visibility. And if this conversation inspired you to own your own voice in your community, to invest in more visibility, to be more of service, share it with someone who needs it, like it, comment, and please subscribe. And we'll see you again on the next Bliss Business Podcast.